The ayes have it. Call Government Order of the Day number 3.
Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill interrupted debate on second reading.
When this bill was last being debated in the House, Carol Beaumont had the call, if she wishes to take that. Otherwise, there's some member seeking the call. Oh, Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please take a call in respect of this bill on its second reading and make a few short points. The first is that when the bill came before the Social Services Select Committee, there are a number of changes.
Order. I'm sorry, Mr. Borrows, I'm just looking at my notes and you've already spoken on this and the member can't take 2 calls.
I'm unsure that I have spoken. I think someone took my place, but if that's your record, I'm happy to take a seat.
Sorry, I'm correct, I'm informed.
Thank you.
So it's some other member. I'm sorry. Tim McIntyre.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and may I say how disappointed I am that my fine colleague Mr. Burrows isn't able to speak to us this afternoon, as I do want to acknowledge what an outstanding contribution he has made as a member of the Social Services Select Committee to the work on this bill. Mr. Speaker, this is an exciting day in our legislative history, as is often the case when bills come to completion and an anticipated passing in the House. But of course this is particularly important because it involves the culmination of a process that has had a very long gestation. In fact, it was under the previous government, as far back I think as 2004, that changes to the Residential Tenancies Act were first mooted, and it's been quite some time to get to this point. But I want to commend the current Minister of Housing for his leadership in bringing us to the point where we are at today, and to thank the members of the Social Services Select Committee who have worked incredibly hard on this bill, and also to acknowledge the many submitters who contributed to our deliberations. It was a complex piece of legislation. It was a challenging task for the Select Committee to work through, but I think we can say that we applied ourselves to the work with a sense of purpose, and I'm delighted with what we have achieved. There are many facets to this bill, Mr. Speaker, and what is really important is that it reflects the importance of striking a fair balance between the interests of landlords and tenants. And sometimes those are competing interests. They can lead to quite serious disputes, and it's obviously important that we have legislation that is fair to all parties. The bill will accommodate, if you'll excuse the pun in the current circumstances, the growing percentage of our population who have a direct interest in tenancy legislation, either as tenants, landlords or investors. And also, as we can sometimes forget, the neighbours of those who live next door to tenanted properties or in the near vicinity. So I think that this is a very timely and important piece of legislation, and I echo its overarching aim to clarify and appropriately balance tenant and landlord rights and obligations. If that can be achieved through this legislation, and I believe it will be, landlords, tenants and their neighbours should all benefit from it. Mr. Speaker, there were a number of changes that were made to the bill during the Select Committee process. In the time available today, I can't really go through that in great detail, but just to assure submitters that their many concerns were heard and a number of important aspects were dealt with. Mr. Speaker, the government wants to see, as I've mentioned, a number of competing interests fairly dealt with. It is important in a system which sees a large number and an ever-increasing number of people owning investment properties and also depending on residential properties for their accommodation as renters or as tenants, to ensure that the investment side is protected and looked after, but also that tenants are able to access suitable accommodation for their needs, and in many cases we're talking about tenants who have very large families, and that can pose challenges in the system as well. And to ensure that those tenants have their rights clearly understood and are able to make informed choices about the best place for them to live, what they can afford, what they will get when they sign up to a rental contract. And so it is very important that landlords and tenants are very clear about their rights. And this bill has gone a long way to update the law to ensure that current demands, current challenges are met. We've got to ensure that we have a robust and flexible rental market that's efficient, that is responsive, and that ensures that housing, which is such a crucial need for all members of our society, is available throughout the country, appropriate to the needs and circumstances of those who are looking for tenancy properties. And Mr. Speaker, may I just finally say how delighted I am to see that a very crucial missing component of the previous legislation has been dealt with under the current bill, and that is the provision in this bill for those who live in boarding houses to come within the ambit of the Act. We have a very large number of people in New Zealand who live in those circumstances. Often they're below the radar, we're not conscious of them sometimes even being in our communities, and yet they are often the most vulnerable people in those communities, and it is good to see that their rights are now recognised in the legislation. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am delighted that we have reached this point. I thank all members of this House, the officials in particular who worked on the bill, for the very important and helpful work that they have done. It's a terrific day for everybody involved in the rental market in New Zealand. I congratulate the Minister on his achievement and I commend the legislation to the House.